Okay, welcome to the Laser Sports Academy podcast. My name is Butzer. Welcome back. It's our second edition, but it's our first edition of a new series this time around. We're going to start a series called Origins, and we want to really dig deep and look at how laser sporting started all over the planet. And where better place to start than where it all started on the planet, in the USA. Today's guest is a very special guest, a friend of mine since 2009 when we met in Finland. He's a US champion on several occasions. He's a world champion on several occasions. He's one of the GOATs. And I'm going to share a little bit later also about how he influenced the play in Australia. He probably doesn't know this, but I'm going to share that later. Big welcome to Noel Slick Borrier. Welcome, mate.
Hey, thank you for having me so much, Boots. It's a pleasure being on and pleasure seeing you. It's been a couple of years since we had a time to chat, and it's been a couple of years since I've actually played some zone competitively. So I'm kind of happy to talk a little bit about the past and at least get it documented somewhere about some of the history of the U.S. and some of the things that have happened here and how things were organized in the beginning. So I'm excited to talk about some of those things.
Yeah, and I can't wait to hear it because they're that I know like a small piece of the stories from the US, and they're all really, really interesting and fascinating. So I can't wait to hear more about how things kicked off. So yeah, we've met in 2009, 2011, 2014 at the World Championships. Some of our viewers may have watched the World Stocko. You featured pretty heavily in that as well. In the World's documentary.
Yes.
Would you be able to just give us a brief background for some of our newer viewers that might not know who Slick is?
Yeah, of course. So I'll start from the very beginning. I was born in Argentina, but came to the US when I was in my teens. And then eventually ended up in California. San Diego is where I originally landed with my dad and my mom. My dad stayed in San Diego. My mom remarried to Las Vegas. So my story for laser tag kind of starts in Las Vegas, but there's an importance to the San Diego story because there's a site in San Diego that I also visited quite frequently as, part of, visiting and traveling. Oh, there you go. Yeah, you got the San Diego on. So when we relocated here to Vegas, I was a teenager, and here, obviously in Las Vegas, if you've ever been or seen any videos of Las Vegas, one of the hotels that should always stick out to you is called the Circus Circus. And Circus Circus back in 1993 opened up its very first laser tag facility inside. So you had this big giant pink dome outside of the hotel. And inside this pink dome was an adventure park where there was a roller coaster ride, things that you can get on. And they had a small laser tag facility, 2 teams, your format, shoot as fast as you can, just go in there and score points. 5-minute games, right? No bases. It was just this dark, smoky, environment. And I started playing that. I want to say this was probably in 94, right? So 1994, and I was in my teens, 14, 15 years old. So that's my first encounter with laser tag in general. Now, obviously, this isn't in the competitive environment. However, when I was in school, I was doing well in one of my classes, and one of the teachers handed out an ultrazone free laser tag pass game for getting an A on an exam or something. And I guess somebody from ultrazone had dropped off a bunch of tickets at our school to give to the teachers, to give to the students for doing well in class. So I got myself a stack because the teacher was like, here, take him. And I was like, all right. So I went and drove out and checked out ultrazone for the very first time, which at the time was on Sahara, out by the Strip, not the closest place to me. So my mom would go drop me off. And then, I went in there, and then I realized it was 3 teams. It was a massive arena. We had multiple levels. We had bases to target. And for me, it was like, it blew my mind. And from that day on, I was kind of hooked and just started going there all the time. Now, obviously, as a kid and laser tag being a little bit expensive when you don't have income as a job and everything else, I found that they offered a special event called Secured Access, which is this event that happens from midnight to 5 o'clock in the morning every Saturday, and you pay $5 or $20, and then they would just lock you into the lobby area. You wouldn't be able to leave, and then you would just go game after game after game and just keep playing. And we would play tons of different formats. It wasn't just your normal comp. It was, we'd play with lights off, with no sound. We would play eliminators. We'd play solos. We'd play triples. We'd play capture, tons of different formats that maybe people have never heard of or have tried. But it was one of those events where every game you went into, the next game was something different. So it was just, just running and keep playing, and you come out sweating at the end of the night. But for $20 as a kid, it was perfect. And that's how I met some of the actual members that were part of, the ultrazone community of the facility. At that time, again, being a kid, and this is again in 95, 96 time, I had no idea that there was an actual competitive scene or that there was a league. And then I attended the very first nationals. The very first nationals was the third tournament in the US. So just to kind of go back into history, we had Clash 1, which was held in Sherman Oaks, California. And then we had a team called Bad Karma from Las Vegas that I was not a part of at the time that went, and they won that event. And then
What year was that, Slick? What year?
This was in 90, I believe this was in 95.
So
95
95 was the first event at Sherman Oaks?
I believe so, yes. It was 95 or 94. It was one of those 2 years, but I want to say it was 95. Again, this is when I was still playing kind of like laser at the, at the dome at Circus. I wasn't tied into it. And then they had nationals. So I kind of was at a lock-in one night and I saw them post the big tournament coming up for nationals, blah, 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 sign up if you want to compete. And then that's how I learned about the team. Now, for us here in Las Vegas, the way the team was always made is they had a tryout. You went over a series of weeks, you played 3 games every time that you went, and then you kind of averaged your score. And after, I don't even remember how many weeks it was, but it was after several amounts of weeks, they would accumulate all the scores, and then the top 10 players or 12 or whatever the roster was, right, made the team. And that's how our team was determined as far as Bad Karma went. Other teams, from other sites did their own thing, whether they hand drafted their teams or whether they did tryouts, whatever, whether the owner just gave it and picked whoever they wanted, that was totally up to them. But for us, that's how the site was run. So I wasn't part of the team, but I was able to participate in the side events. So I signed up for the solos. I signed up for the they had solos, doubles, team, and team eliminator. So obviously I was able to participate in the solo and the doubles. As a young kid, I actually made it all the way into the finals, and I placed 11th the very first time without no team, without no idea of anybody from anywhere, like totally new to the whole sport, right? So that was my first take of that. And I was already in love with the game before that tournament, but that tournament, it made me realize that I was I was there. Like I was already there at a point where like, I know I can be the best at this. And then, so after that, there was a tournament in Myrtle Beach. There was a small event. I didn't go to that one either. And then there was tournaments that started happening again, like BB2, which is in Virginia Beach, which is on the East Coast of the US. So several things happened here in the history of the US. First of all, it wasn't a very friendly environment in between sites. So, we had Las Vegas, which was probably one of the very first sites that opened. It was opened by corporate. And then we had Sherman Oaks, which was one of the other first sites on the West Coast that were opened. We had San Diego open shortly after as well. And then we had like Alhambra in California as well. So those were kind of like the West Coast sites. And if you went a little bit further north, you went up to Portland, where you had the Portland team that had a really good roster. And after that, you start moving to the East Coast, where you have a lot of sites in the Virginia Beach area. Richmond had one, Baltimore, and so forth and so on. And the reason that we had this kind of weird East Coast, West Coast thing was because there was a lot of sites opening up under the corporate banner on the West Coast, like the Las Vegas site and the Sherman Oaks sites, whereas the sites on the East Coast were being opened up by franchise owners. One owner that owned like 5 or 6 sites over there, and he opened up a whole bunch of them. So we had this really huge, like, massive growth in between that like 95, 96, 97, 98 era, where all these sites started popping up, and ultrazone became very popular all around, and there were sites everywhere. But it was very competitive in the sense of like the top teams. Like, for example, when we went to Clash, we played against the local Sherman Oaks team there. People like Skywalker and Shade and them were present at the time. And then obviously there was a clash there, and then there was, not good relationships. And then San Diego came into the picture, and there was clashing between Sherman Oaks and San Diego because they're like 2 hours away from each other, and they would just drive back and forth and, get it on. We were 5-hour drive from them. So all this stuff started happening, and there wasn't a lot of like, we were not friends with the other sites. Nobody was friends with any of the other sites. The same thing in Virginia, like the Virginia sites hated each other. The sites that were right next to each other. And then we hated them because they were the best in the East and we were the best in the West, and we had to settle this. And back in the day, we had the forums, and this was the beginning of the internet back in this era, right? If you remember the AOL days and everything else. So we used to go on the forums, and people would just post paragraphs of just smack talking, bad trash talking to one another, saying how they went into their site and beat on all their players and did this and the other. So the environment early on was very, very competitive, very, very like a lot of smack talk. Like I know it's completely the opposite mentality, like kind of the environment that I experienced when going, and traveling to Australian events, if I would, or encountering the Australian people in general and the mentality behind the tournament.
One of the things about playing the US players, I noticed when they do come and play in the Worlds and things, you can tell they're like surprised or shocked at the way that the teams are interacting and the players are interacting. And I can only imagine what the tournaments must have been like in the early days. Like, what was it like inside the building, like before games, after games?
It was massive yelling and screaming. It was, it was aggressive play. You would go into the arena before the game would start and you'd hear teams start their chants and their roars before the game starts. Then you would hear the game go. When we played in Las Vegas, for example, which was a pretty big site, we had 3 bases, we had upper ramps, and the bases were very, very complicated. There was one door in, there was a panel which 2 people can sit behind the panel watching that one entrance. And then we had 2 little windows on the side, and all the bases were the same. So if you had a righty and a lefty inside that base that can avoid getting stunned from the windows, and you had somebody up in the ramps sniping down on the door, it was really hard to get into the bases. So there was a lot of concentration on strong base D and base cracking early on in the Las Vegas side where we held the first 3 nationals, right? So there was just a lot of yelling, a lot of talking. Get out of my base! You're dead, because you had to walk in through that door, that one door to get in. And it was just massively difficult for a lot of people coming to the site to deal with that kind of an arena and that kind of a base. So there was just a lot of times where we shut teams out and nobody got the base the whole game. And we were, obviously we made that very vocal when things like that happened, and we knew that things like that were happening. We had a lot of
just to be a fly on the wall. I would just give $1 million to be back there and just to witness all that. It'd be
like I mentioned before, I do have videos. Like I've always captured, even on like the small floppy disks back in the day, like inside footage of what I could. And a lot of it is dark and hard to see, but you can hear it, which is the important part sometimes, because you hear some of the funniest things. A lot of things here with the US, people are being very toxic, sitting behind the internet. You can say a lot, you know how that goes. More reflection of it now, but we were, 14, 15, 16, 20-year-old kids with, internet for the very first time. So you can only imagine how much worse it was back then, in the sense of people, talking freely and being aggressive when, and you meet them in person and they're very like passive and don't want to cause that drama. And don't get me wrong, there's others that, when you meet them, they're that exact same person and they'll get in your face and they'll be like, let's go to the parking lot. And you're like, it's one of those situations. Okay. Like they take it that serious. So for me, smack talking and it was a long part of my game. And it's something that I learned really early on in my home site of Las Vegas. I had the luxury of coming in as a young kid, joining and making the team with a group of older people. I was always the youngest on the team. Through the majority of my laser tag career, I've always been the baby of the team up until obviously when I returned back in my 30s. And then at that point, I was no longer the baby of the team. But up until that point, I was always the youngest. So being the youngest player to join the national team, that following year we had Nats. And the way that Nats worked was really cool. We had something called the golden ticket system. So every single site in the US would receive in the mail a little golden ticket that said, hey, you're invited to Nationals tournament in Las Vegas. Will your site please be, represent and send the team? The owners or the managers got that ticket. And then from there, if they wanted to send the team, they can, like I said, put together a team and send it. And the first couple of Nationals, we had a really good turnaround with a lot of teams showing up. I'm trying to look now at national teams, roughly how many teams we had. I think we had 20 something teams show up for the second Nationals. So we had quite a bit, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14. Yeah, so we had quite a bit of teams show up. And then Nationals 2 was also when we introduced Lord of the Rings, which I know this is something you might want to talk about a little bit in the conversation about the origin of Lord of the Rings, because that is something that I was very much involved in as well.
Oh, wow.
Because I was there for that first Lord of the Rings. And I actually helped kind of develop the grid for it. I don't even know if it's the current grid being used, but it should be if it's not, for Lord of the Rings and whatnot. So I'll mention that stuff as well. But me coming Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just you finished what you were going to say, but
Yeah.
at some stage, I want you to insert into the conversation just a little bit about what format you were playing in these early days.
Oh, okay. Yeah, of
Yeah, and
course.
how that developed, because you guys were the first to kind of create that one shot a second stuns the whole game that you guys created essentially became a big part of how the Europeans played, and then how we ended up playing at Worlds. So, yeah, at some stage, I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well, how that all evolved that way.
Yeah. So for me, so again, one of those things is when we went to play laser tag in the US, and pretty much any site, as far as settings go, you would get the party settings, right? I'm going to call it the birthday party settings. I'm sure you guys have them too, right? Where the kids just pop in and they shoot as fast as they can. And I think that the reset timers are cut by half or whatever. So everybody's active all the time, whatever it is that, party mode. But for whatever reason, when we started doing the lock-ins and we started doing the secure accesses, we just started playing with different formats, because one of the luxuries of Las Vegas is that it was like the premier site for testing. Like all the new stuff that came from Australia, I'm assuming, into Vegas was tested originally first in Vegas. So we were like the first site to get the V5 systems. We were the first site to get these, features that you could click, 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 and turn on shields and shoot off, the machine gun on the packs on the V4s. So we got the V4s, we got the V5s, so we were always kind of like getting all the newest stuff. And for whatever reason, when we were doing these lock-ins and these night games, it just felt easier, more competitive, and you could see a gap differential in between players when you had to actually hit your shot. And if you missed your shot, it would allow your opponent to then have a split second to make a movement, whether it was to cross a path or to come at you or whatever. It also made it so that you could dodge and, avoid being shot. Whereas, if you're just, if you have a high rapid amounts of shots per second, you can just kind of just, beam the shoulder nonstop. And then it really doesn't give the other person much to do in that kind of environment. So a lot of times we actually played one shot every 2 seconds. So it was even a slower paced game that we played. And we played those like lights out, eliminator style. So we had like a lot of different things. But I think the big thing is just we felt there was more of a skill gap in between playing one shot a second with the stuns and the DX. It allowed you to, get stunned, put on some flashy moves, come out of the stun and take down your opponent, which was like, whoa, that was everybody that's watching. So that was kind of like, those little factors made the game just so much more interesting versus it being, just as fast as you can shoot, in the arena. Now, don't get me wrong, I've played thousands of those games. That's why when I go in, and I've competed, obviously in 2007, I went and competed in Bendigo on your format, and I've played other events where we've had faster shot rates per second and quicker down times and this and the other. So for me, the change of pace is not, it doesn't affect me that much. I just enjoy, obviously, the ability, the technical movements of the one shot a second, being able to come out of those stuns, especially me being as a fast player and one of those players that was really good at dodging. You would guarantee, if you're watching me in Lord of the Rings during my prime years, there was always 1, 2, or 3 times I would be getting out of stuns every time, and people would be like, what the hell? So it just added that aspect of the game. And that's how it's always been for us in the US, as far as I can remember. It's always been one shot a second with the 4-second stuns and then 8-second DX, 3 stuns equal 1 DX kind of thing.
I think it's such an interesting reflection of what the US players value in the game as well. What you've shared so far about, how much they love the smack talking and those battles, we hate, we hate you, you hate us. Let's go in a battle. Let's prove who's the best, and don't mind pumping up your own tires and get it in people's face. And I think that style of game was just like basically made for that, wasn't it? It's like so. It's just like you can have a 1-on-1 battle, you can have a 2-on-2, 3-on-3 battle, and it's just that's what that 1 shot per second and stun game creates, is just great exchanges between players. So
absolutely. I think one of the cool things is, I mean, obviously you can walk into a base, right, and you have 3 active players in there, and then if you have a fast shot rate, you can, and they're not paying attention, you can pop real quick and then clear them out really fast. But when you play one shot a second, it's like every single shot that you take matters, because the second that you pop the first guy, he's going to scream. And by the time he screams, that you might be able to get that second guy, but the third guy is definitely going to turn, and you have to do something to get the third guy out. So there's more motion to me. And there's this, you have this pop, dodge, pop, dodge, like this little dance that you can do, and you can fake, and then you can take the timing, you know, all these little things that would come with that. And you know, we move into more advanced tactics. Like when we used to play eliminators, a lot of times you would stick your laser out and just wave your laser, let the laser get the stun, because when you get that stun, you have that 1 second of vulnerability, and then you would use that stun to move from one position to another. It would even be to the point where I'd be like, yo, stun me, where you would ask your own teammates to stun you so that you can position yourself and move up without taking a shot of losing a life. So, you know, you kind of learn with our format, the timing of it and everything else. And like for me, you know, V4s were amazing. Like those were the best packs for us to brawl with, because you had to be accurate. And at the same time, it was still accurate to hit. It's one of those weird things. Once V5s came out, V5s were my baby. I was like, I got V5s first. I got V5s before anybody else did, you know, here in Vegas. And it catered to me. It catered to my speed, the way that the laser and the IR spread was. I started spinning. I started flip firing. I started doing things that I was doing on V4s that was very difficult to execute, that I was doing on V5s, like just like butter. It was just beautiful to me. So I fell in love with like the V5 system, even though I'm still a V4 baby. You put me on a V5 pack, you don't, it's like I was a different monster on a V5 pack. And, you know, obviously having it first and everything else obviously gives you an advantage, but it's also the circle of people you're with. Like the Bad Karma team, I'm going to give them the, you know, the biggest shout out. You know, we have Gino, Phantom, Wyatt, Tombstone, all those guys, the original March Hare, all those guys, Lee, you know, the people from the beginning, Karaoke, all those guys, they started the team together, and they were older. You know, it was the biggest yin and yang team you've ever seen in your life. You know, we had like half the team was smokers, half the team was not smokers, half the team was like gothic, and half the team was athletic. Like it was like the most bizarre group of people that we've ever put together, but it worked really well. And I learned a lot from just playing with them, because they were all older. One of the biggest things I learned from them is the mental game, because they smack talked a lot, very aggressively, and we were all friends. And when you're friends with somebody and some people start pushing the lines of saying things on, like, because they know you on a personal level to get under your skin, at that point you realize that then once that doesn't bother you anymore, nobody else can say anything that ever will. But you know now what you can say to really upset other people in different ways, right? So for me, I learned a lot about strategy, a lot about teamwork. Like I remember being young, and my job was to protect our snipers up on the ramps, because our snipers weren't very good dog fighters. You know, they weren't very good brawlers, but they were very good snipers. And I'm up there and I'm fighting guys left and right, and they're just sniping. And I'm like, yo, what the hell are you guys doing? Can you guys fucking help me? I got like, can you guys help me? I have all these guys, like, you guys aren't even looking. What do you guys look like? Help me. And one of them literally looked at me, grabbed me by the pack and says, look, and like pulled me over the edge. And he showed me what was going on down there, which was like everybody trying to get into the base, right? He's like, I'm busy defending the base. Keep these guys off me. And then he threw me back into the mix. And his job was just to focus on that. And my job was to, and then little by little, you start learning that, okay, I understand a role now. My role is this is to protect them, because I understand what their role is and what the importance of their role is, right? Because they're also communicating down and shouting down to the people on the ground floor on what's going on outside the doors. So there's, you know, we learned different levels. You know, eventually I got moved a lot into attack, where I was part of the attack team because of my quickness and my, you know, smaller kid. I can get in and get out really quickly. I could crack bases. And then eventually I rotated into more of a defensive player. And that's kind of where I've ended up in the past, is being more of like strategist, kind of control the situation, make sure that everybody's in the right place. So now me going from where I was as a kid, watching everybody else and understanding the concept of roles and what everybody needs to be doing. Now, when I'm on a team, my job is to make sure that everybody's on the right rotations, that everybody's on the right roles, that people aren't getting sidetracked and telling, like, I don't care about how many packs are over there. The objective is to get what you need to get and then get back to the base. That stuff can wait till later. Don't worry. As long as we do what we do, that group of all those packs that you see will slowly move over to our base, and then we'll have all our guys there waiting for it, and then we'll just win the game then. Don't worry about it now. So there was like a lot of things that I think I picked up from just playing competitively within that group, from the older guys, from just the difference of the group that I was able to carry on. And then eventually, you know, Vegas closed down. We had nationals. So 96, like I mentioned before, was the first nationals where I participated, but I wasn't part of the team. 97, I made the team. 98, I made the team as well. So in 97, I was a secret weapon. I was one of 3 secret weapons. I was not allowed to play any games before the tournament started. Nobody was allowed to see me play. Nobody was supposed to know who I was. I ended up winning solos that year. After that year, everybody knew who I was. We had myself, karaoke at the time was very good. And then we had another guy named Carnage on the Vegas team that nobody kind of knew about. And we were all extremely younger players and we were all extremely good. But a lot of like the East Coast players had never heard of us. San Diego knew of me. Sherman Oaks knew of me because I had spent time in San Diego when I visited my father in the past. And then I had met Sherman Oaks players when I traveled to Sherman Oaks as well. And then in between, probably they were in San Diego or they came up to Vegas at one point or another to one of the lock-ins, and I met them there as well. So some of them knew about me, like Skywalker was probably one that knew about me. Shade probably knew about me. A couple of the big name players from the sites knew about me, but nobody from the East Coast had any idea who I was. And my team was very adamant about keeping that way until the tournament started. And then, so that year did really well. I won solos. I think I took third in doubles. The Lord of the Rings was that year too, and I'll talk about Lord of the Rings in a second because it was really funny how it was done. It was done in a really weird system that we later changed. And then we had the team and team eliminator. So obviously our team, we've never lost, as far as Bad Karma in Vegas, has never lost any team or team eliminator. We lost 1 game in the whole time we've played there out of all the tournaments. So, I come back in 98 or in 97, win that trophy, come back in 98, and I actually flip-flop. I end up getting first in doubles and third in solos, but we ended up winning all the other ones. And then there was a Lord of the Rings, I think, at that Nationals as well. I'm trying to see. Yeah, there was Lord of the Rings, and I ended up taking third in Lord of the Rings for that one. So for that one, we had solos, doubles, Lord of the Rings, best of gender, which was, we had the women's category, and then we had the eliminator and the team comp.
And so how many teams were you getting at this stage? How many teams were coming to the tournaments in 97, 98?
Yeah, so we had a lot of teams in 97, 98. I think we were in like 20-ish teams. We had quite a bit. We had a lot of teams coming in from like Miami had a presence. They ended up doing really well. Virginia Beach would send their teams. Baltimore would send their teams. We started getting teams from like San Diego and Portland would send their teams. So pretty much all the major players, as far as, the big named participants, were all coming to the event. I think I want to say that in those tournaments in the Vegas Nationals, we had the most amount of players from all, all around, from all the sites ever, across the boards, ever, even up to this point today, because that was kind of, I want to say, was the peak, was that era. Around
is that the
time.
era with the human-sized trophies and things that you guys used to have? Like,
yeah. So, for example, so you can kind of see Scott me beat there by a little bit, but yeah, this was. Let me see.
Good luck getting that home on the plane. How did you guys?
Yeah, we had to take it apart. So this was one of the team comp ones for first place. I have a lot of different trophies from a lot of events around me. I wanted to show. Back in the day, this was the big thing, was getting these big, ginormous trophies. Sure, this is. I like this one because the way it was designed, even though it's a little broken, but this is from 90. I'm not sure how well you can see. It's got 2 little dangling buttons. This sort of doubles trophies. So this is the first place trophy from 98. But you can see I kept some of these around. And
what are the little dangly things supposed to represent, mate? Because it looks like
you're
trying to flex or something, like show yourself.
Yeah, you can. No, you can actually. They're login buttons. You can actually ding, 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 and log into the packs with them. So they started giving. I thought that was really cool. We got like trophy buttons, and that was kind of a cool little gift. And yeah, that's how it used to be. You used to have these 6-7 foot trophies for the team events, and
it was crazy.
It was crazy. So I have a couple of these in my garage that I've never gotten rid of. Eventually we moved over to like glass and like what's it called, the plastic,
the perspex ones.
Yeah. So and then I have my more important achievements. But to me, winning the solo tournament in 97 was probably like a really big thing for me. That Nationals too, like that was like I was really like committed a lot of time into laser tag during that time of my life as a kid. In my teens, at that point I was probably driving, and I was driving there every weekend. And And, once I made the team, my life changed too, because, and most of the good players in the world have this same advantage, right? That they somehow get tied in and become friends with the owners or the managers, or they themselves become employees of the establishment of the zone that they're playing at. So when I kind of made the team, I could just show up and hang out, and they would be like, "Hey, do you want to play some games?" And I get free games now. So it's kind of like, it became kind of like a celebrity status for me after that. And I had a really good relationship with, obviously a lot of the teammates were part of management and part of staff. If there was somebody in there that was beating up on little kids, they'd be like, "Hey, can you go in there and make sure he doesn't beat up on little kids for a little while?" And I'm like, "Okay." And I'd go in there and follow around the guy that was beating on little kids for a little bit and beat on him for a little bit. So, so once I kind of got in, I had a lot more luxury of being able to actually look at packs, open up packs, identify how the sensors work on my angles, work on my dodge, like
Make the
to
big
really
difference.
perfect the craft.
Yeah.
And then again, we're also getting the newer stuff first. So I'm taking a look at the newer stuff and understanding, what angles you can get away with, what angles you can't. Whereas the V5s had the backward lean that was very successful.
Yeah.
The V5s now you want to do a forward lean because the back lean was hard. So things kind of dramatically change with the positioning and the IR.
Well, I just want to add quickly before we move on, because a lot of our viewers will have no idea what V4 and V5 is, and at some stage, the Laser Sports Academy will do a little video on this specifically. But just to add some context to what you're saying is, in the early 90s, V4 came out, which was like revolutionary for the sport. Clearly in the US and everywhere else. We started playing leagues in Australia around that time as well. And the way the V4 worked, like the timing still to this day is based upon version 4 timing. So they eventually got into a system called T-System and Infusion, which was horrendous. We called them Kmart packs here in Australia. You probably had similar names for them. And then, eventually we got to Nexus, and they'd based the timing of Nexus back on the old school systems of V4. And the way the packs worked back in the day is you had the chest plate, and the inside of the chest plate was painted black, and it had a couple of windows, and you couldn't the laser would not shoot through the black. It would only shoot through the windows. So
that got changed.
That got changed eventually in later systems. So in those early days, like I feel like it really, really was. I could see why the Lord of the Rings players loved it so much, because you had these tiny little windows that you had to try and craft a shot through, depending on where the opponent's arms were, how they were spinning, dropping, what they were doing. And you had shots and counter shots and all these things going on. So, version 4 being able to work with the packs, knowing where the sensors were, and being able to, basically refine the craft, I could tell would have been a hugely important thing.
I think I have a V4 pack downstairs.
Oh, do you? I've actually got a bunch of them under the ramp here at Laser Zone.
Okay, I was gonna say, if you want to show one, I could probably pull mine from storage down the garage and bring it up and show it to you, because I know I have one in storage and garage. So
that's great. That's great. Well, one thing I will ask you about very shortly. I want to ask you about the Lord of the Rings, as you know. Yes. Actually, before we get into Lord of the Rings and before we get into car parks, I just need to ask, in those early days, as somebody who's played a lot of laser tag and obviously understands strategy inside out at your mature age, where was strategy at in those first few tournaments, 97, 98, 96? But a lot of people don't realize that in the 90s, when we were playing these tournaments for the first time, we were creating the sport. Every year there'd be new moves you hadn't seen before. Like you'll be learning off players from the East Coast will be learning off players from the West Coast. When we played you guys in 2009, that's where you taught us the claw grip on the phaser.
Flip fire,
yeah. And we took that to the next nationals in Darwin and started slaying people with it. And now it's like a standard part of the way everybody plays in Australia. So even in the 2000s, that was happening. But in the 90s, it was happening like from one tournament to the next here in Australia anyway. So tell me a bit about what the evolution of the strategy was in the day. Did you guys create any pieces that are still part of it? Yeah, come on, show off, mate.
Yeah, baby, I got you. So the flip fire really came in when the V5 systems came into play. You could do like the swiping, sweeping action. So for us, so I'll explain kind of where it came out of it for me. So for me, the grip that you're talking about is we call it flip fire. You can do it two ways. You can do it by pulling this way, and then flipping this way and pulling with your thumb, or you could do it in reverse and shoot it this way. So depending on how you want to go high or if you want to go low, there's 2 different ways of doing the flip fire. But in Vegas, like I mentioned before, you had a base that had 2 partitions, and you had to have a lefty and a righty inside to defend it. So when we didn't have a lot of lefties on the team, so we had to figure out a way of defending the left side of the partition when you're righty. And back in the day, in the East Coast, one of the big things that they used to do is they used to do something called wall hugging, which you would take your hands up like this. You would kind of put your head over the shoulder and then lean over the wall and hide your laser. And then when they would come, you would just kind of shoot over the wall like that.
That's essentially how Australians play now.
Okay, perfect. So this was way back in the day, and that's how they played on the East Coast, because you couldn't defend, the wall any other way if you're a righty. Well, we learned a long time ago that you had to, you had to figure out how to shoot lefties. So we kind of just developed this flip fire. We just held the laser like this, and now it's just a matter of just reaching out and pulling the trigger and just kind of being accurate with more or less like your body's aiming, not really your hands, because it's really inaccurate when you swipe your hands. You use your body to reach out and get the shot. So that's where like flip fire kind of started originally in Vegas because of the way the partitions were. Now, I personally started inventing like the over-the-top flip fire because I started having issues with lefties that would lean on me. And because I was shorter and smaller, when these lefties would go back and lean on me, if I would to reach for it, they would just, take the chest, and I wouldn't be able to hit them because they're leaning too far back. And if I would go for the back, they would still have advantage. So I learned earlier on, because we had several bigger players that were lefties on the team, that I had a real hard time. So I started doing this crazy like flipping thing with the laser and then spinning into it. And then I'd start to catch the chest every single time or catch the back every single time. So for me, those are things that were kind of developed in more of like a one-on-one inside the vesting room brawls or playing around partitions and things of that nature. Now, as far as strategies go, strategies were very, very important. We had in Vegas, I think it was 10-man teams. So we had, 3 guys defending the base, 2 would be inside, 1 would be outside. Then you would have your 3-man offense that would be, going on offense and doing their thing. And then you would have 3 people that would go upstairs and play the rafters, 1, defensively, 1 offensively, and 1 kind of control. So we did have tons of strategies as far as, the Vegas stuff went. When we went to other sites, it was the same concept. We'd have anywhere between 7 to 10 player teams. This was before we dropped down to 5, because 5 is a real small number. I don't mind it, but for back in the day, like 10 was normal, 7 was normal. We even had like 12-man team tournaments at one point.
You had much bigger arenas as well back then.
Yeah,
right?
And the East Coast had the bigger arenas with more packs. The West Coast still had 20-something packs. Portland had a lot of packs up there as well.
So you'd have 20-something teams playing of 10, 12 players. So you'd have like 200-300 people at these tournaments, essentially.
Well, the Virginia Beach tournaments where we had like the 12-man teams, they were smaller. There might have been like 10 teams or 9 teams. Yeah. Nationals was always, I think Nationals, I want to say was 8 or 9, maybe 10, somewhere in there. I can't remember exactly how many. Let me see if I can pull a roster from somewhere. 2, 4, 6, 8. Yeah, it was 10-man rosters for sure.
Gosh, I mean, so when you're talking about strategy, like there would have been another level of complexity on top of what we're talking about now.
Yeah, so we always had like 3 rotations. So I come from so for my era, like we always focused on 3 rotations. We had, the rotation that was attacking, that attack rotation would then either go back to base D and then stay on base D for the rest of the time. And then the base D would then go on offense and get their bases. And then they would then rotate upstairs, and then the upstairs team would then go down and get their bases. Sometimes the upstairs team was like, a lot of it was kind of like, see if you can sneak it and do it on your own kind of thing and find your opportunity, because, players are smart enough once they understand and can read the arena and read numbers. Laser tag is really simple. It's about reading packs. If you're a good player, you can look at an area and see the numbers and go, okay, this is where I want to be, or say, no, this isn't good enough for me. I need to go somewhere where there's more packs, more points.
Yeah.
And
did you guys have denials back then? Do you guys have denial scoring?
Yes.
Denial scoring from the start.
Yeah, so we had comp scoring. So the way it worked is you would put 1 shot into the base, you'd lose 500 points, put another shot into the base, lose 500 points, put the 3rd shot into the base, lose 500 points, and secure the base. But the base was worth 4,500, but you only got 35 for tagging it or whatever, or 3,000, sorry, for tagging it. Yeah. However, if you put 500, and then somebody comped you,
Yeah.
then you would, the next time the base value just dropped by 1,000 if you went for it again. And eventually, if you getting comped, there wasn't like the now points where the other team was getting points for stopping you. They were just getting punished more and more and getting themselves more and more into negatives if they kept trying to go for the base. So you knew after a certain amount of times, if you got comped, cut your losses. You're not gonna, you're not gonna win ahead at this point. You've already lost a lot of points. You can make up 500 points in packs really easy in an arena with that many, with 20 opponents, right? It's not hard to hit 5 chests. That's you hit 5 chests, that's 1,000 points. You make up your difference there really quickly. And I think sometimes people didn't understand that concept either. Like people overvaluate bases or underevaluate bases at times. Like you really have to understand what's happening in the game and when the bases become really valuable. Because if you have a lot of teams that are defending the bases and nobody's getting bases because the bases are so hard to get, the importance now becomes on getting pack points and focusing you're focusing on, okay, I'm going to make up the difference of that base by sitting here and hitting X amount of packs before I move on to do the next thing. So, there was a lot of development. So for us back then, the strategies were very, very intense. They're very, strategic. They're very oriented. And we always had people that were in like group leaders, right? So you had your offensive leader, which I'm sure you have now. You have your offensive leader and your defensive leader kind of, right? Well, before we had our offensive leader, defensive leader, and then our roaming group or a support group or upstairs team, whatever you want to call it, right? There was always 3 groups and they rotated around.
So when you were preparing for these tournaments, did you have people to train against? Did you have ways to train these strategies?
Yeah, so obviously we had a big base in Vegas. We had the secured lock-ins and we had a lot of practice modes where we would invite other players because it was a tryout system, right? So we'd have 20-something people try out to make the team, 30-something people, 50-something. It was always different. But you'd have all these members come in and try out. And eventually what we would do is we would say, hey, we're going to do a night where we're going to play 3 or 4 games or whatever against whoever wants to compete. And if you want to come and compete, you play for free. So we would comp with the other teams, and they would put teams together and we would come and play. We would also break up our teams a lot. Like I mentioned before, it was like this weird, we were called Bad Karma. We had the whole yin yang thing. And it really felt that way. Like the group it was any way that you looked at the group, it always split 6 and 6 or whatever it was, 5 and 5 on, just personalities or anything you can imagine. It was just always this weird, but it was always a good mesh of it until it wasn't, because eventually it did all fall apart and went to shit. But the teams got split because of different leaders, and then Bad Karma itself, the Vegas roster got split into 2 different teams. And then once Vegas closed down in 2000, it was for me, I became a free agent. So I think one of the funniest things that a lot of people don't know about my personal experience in laser tag is that, I played up until 99, 2000 when my site closed. And when my site closed, I was homeless. I didn't have a site and I never got a chance to walk on down to put on a pack and play. All the tournaments that I was going to from that point forward, I was going to without practice. I didn't have the luxury of playing. The closest thing I had was going to San Diego or going to Sherman Oaks. So if I was visiting my dad, I'd go down there and play a couple games with, the San Diego players. Or if I was in Sherman Oaks, I would go down there and play with, all my friends all in California that were down there, which is the majority of the legends and that group of people. But for me, I was homeless. So for me, a long part of my life after that Nationals event is I became a free agent. And I actually ended up playing for other teams. I ended up playing for San Diego. I ended up playing for Baltimore. I ended up playing for Virginia Beach. I ended up playing for Sherman Oaks. So I ended up kind of being drafted to go to play on different teams. So I then got to mesh with other people, meet other people, and then kind of pass on a little bit of my knowledge to some of those teams. I think, for example, Baltimore was one of the very first teams that I jumped on that had a very young roster, but lots of talent. That myself, because it wasn't just me, I think Karaoke was with me and one other player came over, and we kind of just showed them, how to kind of work with it. And then Baltimore became a much better team. Yeah. And then we had the whole infusion incident and the T system incident happen where they started being released out here. And that really killed the competitive scene for us.
So before we get into that, just very quickly, because that's a key part of the US history, and it really changed the path of where everything went. Let's just quickly deviate into LOR, the invention of LOR and car parks. Let's cover that, and then let's get back into the slick free agent and infusion.
Let me go. I'll knock out the LO star. So the LO star stuff's pretty cool. So the LO stuff, it was always one of those things where we always loved dogfighting. So it just seemed natural to have this tournament where it was just a one-on-one thing. And the concept it was called Lord of the Rings, kind of the same time around the movies and everything else, whatever. But it was what it's called. And the idea is there was a ring, and I actually have one. There's a ring with a button. I have to find it, and it has a button on it. And whoever won that event got the Lord of the Rings, right? So you'd have this cool little login button and everything else.
So it's not about being in a ring at all. Everybody thinks it's about being in a ring, but it's actually originally it was about having a ring.
Right, having a ring. So
That's gold.
then we take a room, right? And we decide, okay, we're gonna make a space. And we ended up deciding that I think it was a 10-foot circle is what we ended up on at the end of the day. So, you do the 10-foot circle, and that becomes where you have to stay in and you can't leave those lines. And in the very beginning, it was actually a one-on-one system. So if you would imagine having like a dartboard, right, where you had the 0 in the middle, and then on the outskirts you had the 2, and then on the outskirts you had 3. And the way it worked is you would just walk into this was the first Lord of the Rings at Nationals. You'd walk into the room. We had it in a little party room, it was pitch black, and you would have your little name tag, and you would be on the outskirt of the circle. And what you would do is, if you wanted to play, you would say, hey, I'm next or whatever, get in your queue, and you would put yourself onto who you're challenging in this thing of circles. And if you beat your opponent, you would take a spot and you would move one place lower. And then, people would play their cycles, whatever, and then people would shift and move in and out of the circle continuously. And that's kind of how it kept going in the very beginning. So it was kind of like a free for all. There was no like grid for it or system. It was just like, hey, I'm free. I'm sitting around. I want to play a game. I challenge you. Let's go. And then if I take your spot, and then if you're sitting there and you're in the circle, somebody might challenge you. So you're just kind of hanging around waiting for somebody to challenge you. And then you defend your spot against whoever challenged you. So that's kind of how it was in the beginning. It was very like, I don't want to say it was disastrous in the very beginning. It was a lot of fun, but it wasn't taken very serious, I think, at that time. I think that was also the year of the V5s. And the V5s were like, a fresh V5 is like, the lasers on them were, for people that have experienced it, it's like a very high-tuned Nexus pack, if you will, with like the phaser on full blast, same concept.
So V5 was essentially V4, but they put the multicolored LEDs in, didn't they? So they could be any color LED. And was there any other significant changes from V4
Yeah,
to
so the laser was a change. It went from the ticking to the hand sensor on the top where the light would come off and there'd be no ticking anymore. So the shape of the laser was slightly different. The cord was different. We had more of a springy cord with more flexibility than the tight cord on the V4s. The plastic on the V5s was clear now, so you can shoot through those sensors, and the IR was much more powerful on those lasers, so you could get away with doing more of the fancy swooping and spinning and swiping and behind, over the shoulder, behind the back, those kind of like tricky little things that you have to be like super accurate on the V4s. Now you can kind of do them on like a little bit of a quick movement with the V5. So it made it more like like a dance. To me, it's always been like a dance. Just V5 just made it a much smoother dance for me because everything just flowed, and when you shot, you hit, and things went down. With V4, it was like it was like one of those gritty back and forth kind of things. With the V5s, you didn't go back and forth more than 3 times. If you went back and forth more than 3 times, it was this beautiful display of people spinning around and doing their dodging and then shots being missed because you typically would hit with the V5s a lot easier. We even had to tune down the IR on those. So after that Nationals, I believe there was I didn't win that one, the very first one. I was in the circles, but I didn't. It was one of those things where I was interested in winning, but I didn't want to do too much because it was my breakout year, if you will, at the time. So I believe at the end it was like Nomad was one of the Bad Karma members against FX, who was a player from, I think I want to say he was from Miami somewhere, and then they ended up playing, and I think the guy from Miami won. After that, the system kind of changed a little bit, and we ended up kind of incorporating some different ideas for Lord of the Rings throughout the years. And eventually, it became a one-on-one. We decided that with 2 people, that was one of the issues of the very first Lord of the Rings. There was 2 people. So when one person was down, the other person, there was just a lot of like nothing going on. And with the V5s, the dancing didn't happen very often. It was one person just kind of dominating the other person for the majority of the ring. So we added the element of the third person, which then changed it dramatically because now you have to manage the timing, you have to manage the stuns, because you know that if you shoot one guy and then shoot the other guy, and now they're going to come up at the same time, and you hit a stun, and then you hit a stun, or if you hit the first one and you hit a stun, now you split. So there was a lot of strategy involved in that, how to time out your opponents, so that you have that time to turn around and get the other opponent. Because it's really hard, and for smart players, I'm sure you know by now, that if you're playing the Lord of the Rings and you do that where you shoot one and the other, right? That second person that shot, that person has advantage. If that person's smart, he's going to reposition himself somewhere where when these two people come up in battle, no matter which one of the two people win, they're going to have a hard time locating you within that 1 second to shoot you, because you're going to position yourself in a way that they have to do something with their body or physically move to find you. And at that point, you're hoping to drop and take the easy shot, take them down. And then now you're stuck in that situation, because even though he took down that guy that 1 second, you took down that one guy. So now he has the advantage coming back up. So he should be doing the same thing. So little things just started developing, and then just became a matter of timing and understanding, counting packs in your head, counting DX in your head, right? Understanding how many times you've been down, not necessarily the full count, but knowing that I'm 1 ahead of him. I'm 2 ahead of him. Okay, he's 1 ahead of me now, or he's 2 ahead of me now. I don't even know exactly how many. I just need to know roughly where I'm at sitting between the numbers. And you can do that, when you're playing Lord of the Rings and paying attention, especially back in the day when you could check your DX count on your pack and things like that. You hold on the trigger and it would read out how many DX you had. So you kind of be like, okay, normally in an LOR game, you shouldn't have more than this. If you're at this number, you're winning. If you're below 10, you're definitely winning that LOR.
So this is the second year. What year was this? The second year
So the second year was 90. So the first year was that we did this. Let's see. This was 90. This was 90. This is the year I won solos, was the first year. So that was 90. Sorry. 96 was the first LOR. 97 was a second nationals where we did. I'm sorry. I'm confusing myself here. Second nationals was when we did the very first LOR. Third nationals was when we had the whole new system down 4 with the 3s.
And the third nationals was the 98 or 90?
Yes. So it was 96, 97, and 98.
Okay, so 97 we did the first LOR. 98 is it fair to say 98 was taken a lot more seriously in terms of the level of competition and things like that? Like people really wanted to win it?
Yeah, I think so. I think 98 was probably the most, it was funny. I remember going to the very first one, and people would set up tents around the parking lot area. So people would have their camps, and then because we have a big parking area and we have another parking area in the back around the building. So, it's Vegas, it's hot for whatever reason. People park their trucks and have water, and then people build tents. And all of a sudden, every team was in like their own little tent, and it was like this really weird, like look around, analyze your enemies kind of like, it was a really like eerie, weird vibe. And I wasn't even on a team that year. I was just there for the events, for the solo and the doubles, and I could see that. And every year it continued to be that way, where people would start to camp out and they would have all their groups, and little by little people started mingling. There was a lot of even screaming and yelling in the parking lot. Like there was one year where one team, I believe it was the Miami team, ended up punching a hole through the window of their van that they drove from Miami all the way to Vegas, because they celebrated, because they beat us, or I want to say they beat us. That was one of the losses that we ever took, and they were so happy and ecstatic that one of their dudes just punched the window through the van.
Of course.
So yeah, so we, the environment there was very cool. We had a lot of teams show up, and a lot of people, there, and you're
playing the LOR. Were you playing anything else in the car park, or was just everybody rocked up to the car park, set up their tents, and watched everybody else play LOR? Is that how it worked?
So there was a variety of different things. So the LOR, the very first one, was indoors. Eventually, we took them outside, and people would watch some of the stuff outside. But it was just where we would just hang out. I think it was mainly because like back in the day, a lot of people smoked, I guess, and kind of that was like the safe haven was to sit outside the front where they could smoke and mingle and kind of just hang out. So it's more of just like the setup for the tournament, right?
Okay.
We didn't really have, like, we weren't prepared with like cameras and seating arrangements and for everybody, so there wasn't room for everybody inside the building. So people kind of set up camps outside early on with all the teams.
And were the tournaments happening at night, or were they happening during the day?
They were always at night. So that was
Yeah.
kind of one of the other cool things that always happened is the tournament started at night. I believe they started typically at midnight, very similar to kind of how our secure accesses were. And they would push all night long, and then you would sleep all day, would get up and then come at night. So I think we started eventually pushing tournaments at like 10 as the earliest, but we did start a lot of tournaments back in the day, like around midnight and stuff. And the reason for that was because it was after hours. We didn't take away from the general, public and whatnot, and the normal operational things you have to deal with keeping the business happy and everything else. But
I'm seeing all these. I'm seeing a nighttime in Vegas, all these dodgy laser tag players with tents all screaming at each other.
Yeah.
Super competitive. This would have been a scene, mate. I can imagine what it was
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, like I said, I'll look for some pictures and videos. I know I must have some stuff somewhere. This stuff, I know people do. I'll dig for some stuff, and see what I can find. But yeah, that was how it all started. LOR just continued to develop because it was more of a bragging rights kind of thing. That's really what it came down to. It was like, there's one thing to be really good in the arena, and there's a really good thing to be really good in a one-on-one situation when you're dogfighting or facing off with somebody, right? If you're a good solo player, you should never ever be brawling. You should never ever be in a dogfight, right? You should be looking for points and and hitting packs and keep it moving. Keep it moving. There's no reason why you should focus on one guy and have a one-on-one fight with one guy when you're in the arena focusing on pack points and you're playing solos, or your job is to score points for your team, or your job is to whatever role it is that you're currently given. And then there's completely different environment when you're on one-on-one, no walls, no partition, the person's in front of you, and you have to either duck, spin, lean, throw a feint, throw some flip fire at them, go opposite handhold so that they're uncomfortable with what you're positioning, whisper something naughty in their ear, whatever it is that it takes when you're in that environment. It's very different than how it is when you're playing in the arena. But it's just as important, because a lot of the stuff too, like when you're playing solos and you're trying to score the packs, when you come up and you become active, you want to be able to, take that first person down and the second and third and the guy that comes up on you as well. So, but it's two different arts. I always say it's two different arts. So LOR kind of became more of like a bragging rights. It became more of a display of speed, a display of dodging, right? And there's a lot of different styles. Like throughout the years, you can watch, I can tell you 10 different people that play LOR completely different. And you would have to adjust your play style completely to adjust to these people, because they're so unorthodox, or they do things that are not natural. Their bodies bend differently than others. There's just a lot of those players that just have different qualities that they bring to the table. Some of them bring flexibility, height, like I said, speed, footwork, which is something that I've always thought was super important when it came to laser tag. So Lord of the Rings for us in the US was mainly that. It was bragging rights. It was, I'm better than you. And, this is how we show it by, drawing the line on the floor and let's go. And we did a lot of that. Like, that's how we practiced a lot of what we did was, breaking into bases and dog fighting and fighting in the locker rooms, the vesting rooms, excuse me. A lot of times we didn't even go into the arenas, or we would go into the arena, select an area, and we would all just stay in that area and fight. And then that's just kind of how you got better at, timing people and we did 2-on-2-on-2-on-2-on-2-on-2. We would do things like that where it's very hectic and there's a lot of action going on and you're running around and having those moves and being able to take that dodge and that lean and do it the right way to avoid that person. You see where their hand is, how to counter the shot that's coming. You can kind of look at their feet and if they're going to spin. Like, so many different tells when it comes to Lord of the Rings that people don't realize. You can look at their feet, you can look at their waist, you can look at their hands, you can look at how they're holding the laser, you can look at their eyes. All that stuff is giveaways onto what's coming next.
It's a game of poker and a game of laser tag all combined.
Everybody has their what their comfort levels are, right? If I sit here and I watch you play for 5 minutes, I already know all your comfort levels. I know what that comfort shot is that you're going to bring, that you're going to be like the one that you're going to go to get you back in the game.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because everybody has that one thing, or that 1, 2, 3, that I have these little tricks that normally will work for me. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one a go. Yeah. When people start catching on to those, and then just knowing that all you need to do is sidestep, or all you need is just a straight duck or a straight lean, the footwork is all it takes, and you can avoid, the Lord of the Rings. And pack counting, knowing that who's in the lead, knowing what you need to do to catch up, and managing stuns, being able to say, hey, I'm going to stun him once, I'm going to deactivate him, I'm going to stun him again,
Mm.
I'm going to stun him again, and I'm going to deactivate him again. Why? Because I want this guy to go down further than this guy. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of stuff that with Lord of the Rings, for me, strategically, like it plays a lot. And Smack Talk too. Like when you get stunned and he misses one shot, he misses the second shot, he misses the third shot, and you take his chest and you're like, rah! You know, that just pure rage comes out of it. Totally. Like there's nothing better than that feeling, you know. And the same scenario happens in the, you know, I'm sure you've seen it. You guys have seen more and more of it in your Lord of the Rings when you guys play that, you know, you have these weird situations where like somebody gets stunned out, you know, the other two people shoot each other and you're like, ha, I got out of this one alive.
Doesn't
but
it
now you got to deal
as
with both of them coming up at the same time.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that situation? So like, you know, normally for me, I have strategies that I do in all these situations that I know that, hey, if they took each other down and I got stunned, I'm going to be the active player up. I know they're both going to come up. I know which one is my bigger threat. That's the one I'm going to make sure I take down first. While I take him down, I'm going to intentionally turn my back to this guy and lean this way so that he misses his shot. So that after I take this shot, I'm already in position to flip and hit him in the back with the other shot. And then come out of the double stun. So when you can pull that off, people are like, oh my God. So there's, you know, Lord of the Rings to me is a beautiful craft. It's art, it's dancing to me. It's footwork, and it's creativity. So for all those things, I love it. And it does transfer over to the arena tremendously. Add partitions to it. And if you know how to, you know, do your flip fires, and then you can start practicing it around the partitions and things like that, it gives you huge advantages.
Well, watching you guys in 2009 was the first time we saw you guys in Finland. It was basically blew our noggins. We were like, holy moly, this is what's possible in a pack. And forget the two people who made the final that year. I think one was Dot and there was Sevron was the other one.
Sevron was the other one, yep.
Watching like basically go from being a tiny little ball on the ground to 6 foot in the fractions of a second, moving his pack like a whole foot essentially in such a short amount of time. Obviously not great for your back, but very, very impressive. Like in terms of like the visual spectacle of it, and just how skilled it is to time the drops and lifts and twists and turns and everything the way you guys do.
Yeah, so he was one of the very unique ones I mentioned. Definitely his ability to drop, his lengthiness, his ability to stretch. He had really good timing. He was, you know, he also had the same luxury that I had and several other people, that he was very involved with the pack and the packs. He understood the system way better than I ever understood the system. That's for sure.
He was a technician at one of the sites, wasn't he?
Yeah. And I mean, he what did he do? He made Nexus packs with infusion layers. Like he was the Frankenstein of
exactly. It's the man that PNC hated for changing the you know, for messing with their tech essentially. And he created it's been long enough for us to be able to mention this publicly now, but he create like a some kind of customized pack that you could play. It
was like it was a infusion pack.
With that's right.
The
Infusion
Nexus pack. Laser, the big red one.
Yep. But with V4 timing.
With V4 timing, correct.
And he put his own chip in and stuff. It was incredible. And it worked great. It worked great.
And that actually revived a huge part of the US scene, because we'll talk about it in a little bit, but that was a huge change for us. And then obviously when Nexus came out and everything moving forward changed the scene again for us to get things rolling to a certain degree again. But as far as like the Lord of the Rings stuff goes, you know, that was kind of how it started going. And then we ended up deciding that, you know, with Mark Young, who was a big involvement in it from Sherman Oaks, you know, he really liked the concept of it, because it was, first of all, something for people to do while they were sitting around waiting, and to be able to have an area that they could just go play in and still stay warm and still stay functioning. It was also an area to show your abilities, right? To show that you're coming up and getting better. It was also a place for us to help other people get better too, because I could say I coach tons of players throughout my career. Even when I was competing against them, I would still coach them. I would tell them, you're giving away your feet, your hand. Stop holding your laser this way. You're giving away the tail by turning your head this way. I know you're going to spin that way. Stop turning your head early. Little things like that, we would just coach them on, and they would see improvement, and people got way better. I think Lord of the Rings was one of the big reasons why there was such a continuing level of people getting better at the sport itself, because I think the arena play was only limited so much. But in the Lord of the Rings, it was really your own time to develop your own skills against other players and learn all the new technicians. Like you said, you guys walked out of here with the whole flip fire stuff and the whole thing that was new to you guys. That was brand new to everybody back in the second Nats too. That was something that I had developed. It was called SNS, like Slick and Sniper. That was my doubles partner back at the time. And me and him were the ones that just started doing this crazy stuff where we started just flipping over, and we called it, it was flip fire. That's literally what it became called later. But originally it was called SNS. And we were one of the very first people to do it. And not only just to do just the regular flip fire, but then add the flip fire with spins, and add the flip fires with spins and dips and leans and everything else. And then nobody else was doing anything like that. It was very different. And then, after that Nats, I think everybody in the US just inherited the whole flip fire thing and the whole, and then that just went from there. Everybody just learned it. And then from there, people started having their own different weird hand styles of holding laser. And I'm like, hey, whatever works for you, man, as long as it's not doing this, I don't care. You know what I'm saying? So
cool, man.
So that was that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a great wrap up of Lord of the Rings. So essentially, what I found really interesting there is just how much it influenced the development of play there. I didn't realize, I knew it was a spectacle, but I didn't realize it was such a tool for everybody to learn and get better. And you can see why you had so many good players playing LOR. You actually, that's the thing about laser tag, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, we didn't really have cameras in the arenas or anything like that. So you couldn't really learn from watching other people play like you can now. You can watch a Twitch stream and actually improve your play, but that wasn't the case back in the day. So having something like Lord of the Rings where everybody can stand around and watch the best players actually, apply their craft, gives them the opportunity to learn and grow. So
what's really funny, like something I mentioned that's really funny, in the early days, sandbagging was a really big thing. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the term sandbagging, but pretty much means go into the practice games and intentionally don't try. Just scout out who you're playing with. And I would go in and, again, me being the new guy on the team back in the day, them not wanting anybody to know who I was, I would go in and I would play left-handed. I would, not try. I would hit shoulders only or whatever. I would just go in there and mess around just to get an idea of how these other players, because I'd never seen all these other players either. I was just familiar with the West Coast group, San Diego, California. So, I remember, I remember this to this day. I remember coming out of games and saying, these people are really bad. This is way back in the day, right? And again, we, us as Bad Karma, we had a huge advantage. We were a really good team, and just been playing a lot longer than a lot of these other people had, and whatever experience and our own self-competitiveness, we're just very good. So I would walk out of games and I was just like, everybody's got to be sandbagging. There's no way that anybody's trying in these games. They're that bad. And then the tournament started and I was just ripping through everybody. And I was like, wow, they weren't sandbagging. I was sandbagging. You know what I mean? So there was a lot. And then I kind of learned where, you start to fit in with things at that tournament for me. And once I, like I mentioned before, I had gone the year before. I wasn't on the team. I was just a young kid, played the solo event and made it to the finals, placed 11th. And then my next time come back and take first and take third. And then, I've always placed pretty much top 5 across the board for most major solo events I've ever played on any platform. And then my international ones that I've placed like 10th and 11th, aside from winning the last.
Well, I was going to say, we could not get through this interview without mentioning 2014, because how old were you when you won Worlds in 2014?
So that was 8 years ago. So I'm 42 now. Oh my God, I'm old. So I was in my early 30s.
So in your early 30s. And to add some context to that, so you had committed to play on the Legends, come to Australia and play the world titles, and your partner got pregnant, and you had a baby due, and had what was the baby a week old when you came to Australia, or very
something like that? So I'll even start the story a little bit further. So in 2013, I actually held nationals here in Las Vegas. We have a Battle Blast facility that opened up, which is like a small little zap zone thing, if you would. I only had 2 bases. I got to become really good friends with the owners. I met them. I did some graphic artwork for them, and did some side stuff for them for free. They let me play for free, whatever. And then eventually we negotiated and they let me host the 2013 tournament there. During that 2000 tournament, I made it a little special. We had party buses. We went out to some clubs, if you will, and with the groups. We had a good time. Let me just put it that way. And that night, me and my wife sealed the deal, and that's when Petty started being created, if you will. So
Petty.
fast forward now to 2014, right? We have the tournament coming up, and my wife is pregnant, and I'm told that, hey, the first doctor that we went and saw was like, hey, it looks like the baby's gonna be born in between these days, and those days were literally the days of the tournament. So I call up the guys, and keep in mind, we had planned this trip 2 years in advance. So this was a 2 years coming that we had been talking about doing this. I had I had put in my work 2 years, the vacation time off ahead, because I'd been working the same job for 5 years or whatever at the time. And so I was ready to go. So then this bomb shell hits, and I tell the team, and they're like, all right, well, wait it out, whatever. Then we finally go and do another medical visit, and they do the whole ultrasound and the whole official one. And they're like, no, you're good. The baby's not going to be born until 2 weeks after, or 2 weeks before the event or whatever. So I was like, all right, cool. So that means I can go. So we kind of played it by ear. I talked to my wife. I flew in her mom from out of town to stay with us. And then obviously my mom helped out as well. And then she said, yeah, go ahead and go. I was like, okay. So I literally left my baby girl just born to come to the tournament. So for me, 2014 Worlds meant a lot more personally for me than it did for anything else. Like, it was a big sacrifice for me to take that time. So for me, I was going to make sure that I made it worth everything that it was worth. So I went in there with the mentality to drive the team as much as I could drive the team to win, and then to win. Like, I didn't want to leave that without any better results than that. But yeah, that's kind of how that went down. And then,
it was so special, mate. Like, as obviously we were on the receiving end of you guys winning, but to see you, as a new father myself, I now even recognize it even more how difficult that would have been to have to say goodbye to your family, come over. You're thousands of kilometers away. You're thinking about them the whole time, and you're also trying to focus on the tournament, and to go in there and win the solos, which is only one person gets to win solos. It's a hard tournament to win. It's probably the hardest to win. So that was just such a special moment. I can imagine how special it must have been for you. It was a special from looking from the outside in as well.
Yeah, it was super special for me. The whole trip. My wife was supposed to come with me on this trip. She's always wanted to go to Australia. This would be her first time. I had already been there in 2007 for the Bendigo event in the past. So I've already been to Australia, and I loved it. And I was so excited to go back and to take her with me. And we're doing Suncoast by the beach. It's summertime.
Had the best pad in town.
Yeah, so she was, she was in the best mindset. Obviously, she was kind of a little jealous about the whole situation, but what can you do? And I felt bad about that too. Obviously, I wish that she came along as well and was part of the ventures. But it is what it is. And
you just have to bring the whole family back, mate. That's fine.
Plan on it one day. I do want to. I love the scene there. 2007 Bendigo, the Worlds event, everything I've ever seen you guys put online. When I watch stuff online, I'm always blown away and always grateful for all the effort that everybody puts into to promote it. Like, we tried a lot of stuff on our end too to make the thing better, and we were just never able to really get things going here. I think a lot of it had to do with money. The company wanted to make money more than caring about like the groups and the facility owners. I think Australia has a lot of facility owners that come together and work together, whereas the facility owners here in the US are more scattered, and they're more focused on making a successful business than they are of caring for the concept of the tournament.
I couldn't think of a better segue, mate, for us to start talking about our next area.
Okay.
So there is a fundamental difference between who ran the tournaments in the early days. So where I'd like to go now is let's start talking about the post infusion era. So what happened to the US scene around the 2000s, and maybe just start off by also just letting us know who was running the tournaments in the early days. I think that provides a bit of context in terms of who's making decisions about things along the way as well.
Yeah. So I think that the very first couple of nationals, when we had the golden ticket and all that stuff was going on, that was done by corporate. So that was definitely run by we had a corporate office here in Las Vegas, and then we had the corporate laser tag site, and then they had, I believe, another corporate office in California with Sherman Oaks. and those were kind of like the two main offices. So that was the group that held all the national events. A lot of that was coordinated behind like Mark Young, and then beyond that, it went into like the managers of the sites. Like for example, in Las Vegas, Gino Phantom was a manager, and he helped run the event, but he also played in the event. You had people like karaoke and stuff like that. Doug was a huge factor, and Doug was I met Doug in Las Vegas when the Las Vegas site opened. I've
So
known
we're talking
Doug
about Doug Burbage here, aren't we?
since I was like 15 years old or 14 years old. I've known Doug, so me and him have traveled together. We've been to events together. I think Doug is a wonderful person and a huge asset to the laser tag community.
First Hall of Famer here in Australia, by the way. He we started the Hall of Fame, and him and Doc got inducted first. So that's how special he is to us.
They deserve it. But Doc, another wonderful person, tons of stuff for the sport. Couldn't say nothing but nice things about those two people. So super happy to hear that. Like, I didn't even know that. That's awesome. Like, that's great. So we get Infusion, we get System T. The big thing with Infusion System T is the order, right? The startup order. You have this weird system that the lights turn on, but you can't shoot them yet, but they can shoot you. So it was like one of those things where, like, if you were the active player and they were down, you had like go run around a corner somewhere and hide, wait for them to come up, and then shoot them and then come back out. So it kind of took away the whole face-to-face, let's fight it out kind of thing. And, I have a chance now because I'm going to do a fancy move and get you, to where like you don't have a damn chance of doing anything because I'm going to, you're not going to know when I'm active kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it became a much more of a bigger importance. Obviously, timing was very important in V5s. With V5 systems, are you guys familiar with like no lighting people?
We call it black packing.
Black packing, no lighting, same concept. So back in the day with the V5 packs, if you had timing, you can black pack all day long.
Yeah.
And there was players like I'll use one of the best players that I know that had timing was like Mr. Freeze from Sherman Oaks, Elliott. His timing was impeccable. I don't know if he sung a song in his head or he just magically kept numbers or whatever, kept the count, but he would just, before you could even get the shot off, it was like that. So now we have Infusion, which makes that even worse. And it really gives the advantage to the player that's down. And it kind of just took away from the whole competitive scene from us. And a lot of people just stopped playing. In 2000, Las Vegas closed down. So then the next nationals, we moved over to nationals. At that point started floating all over the place. The next one went to Tennessee in Clarksville, which we, was hosted over there, and we flew over there and competed over there. Then it got moved to like Sherman Oaks. It went to Alhambra. Then it went to Baltimore. It was in Baltimore for a couple times there. Then now it's jumped to Fort Wayne. It's been up in Portland. So our national scenes after Vegas closed down in 2000 started going to different locations. And all those locations were being run by players. It was tournament based, ran by players. So whoever it was, a lot of times it's like John Mason on the West Coast with Mark Young and some help with whoever was there, Sevron in the Midwest and whatnot with that help. And then Pete, Assassin on the East Coast as well. So we had a lot of these players that were also in positions with good relationship with the owners or managers or whoever that could literally, we would rent out the facility and we would do like, rent out the facility and do the tournament during that rent out time. And that's kind of how it went. And that's one of the reasons why all the tournaments were at nighttime, because we did it after hours where it wouldn't affect them and their normal hours and stuff like that. And we had
what was happening to the team numbers over these years?
Dwindling dramatically? Yeah. So we had this really terrible thing happen. In the very beginning, it was very, you represented your site and you played with your site. And there was you didn't like go and play with a different team. You always kind of played with your site because that's how it was. Once sites started closing down and Infusion started kind of coming around, a lot of the players were like, they didn't have homes anymore. So they became kind of free agents and they were allowed to go and play in different places. So what ended up started happening is super teams started happening, which I'm not sure if you guys are there yet. Hopefully,
Well, we specifically changed our rules in the very early days because the early things that happened in the US. So we actually knew about what was happening at the early 2000s, and Doc, Wombat, Andrew Larkin, a whole bunch of those early Ben Jansen, a whole bunch of those early operators in Australia. We decided to go to, you have to play within your state in order to alleviate the super team issue,
Yeah.
essentially.
So we had a rule like that too. Originally, we had a rule where like you had to have X amount of games played at the site within a certain amount of time period to allow you to play for that team. So for example, like Nationals 3 or the Nationals 4, when we went to Clarksville, I put together like a team. It was like a couple of us, and it was 2 or 3 of us from Vegas with the Portland guys and a couple of Virginia Beach guys. And it was like, the top 3 guys from each site put together, and we went kind of put together a little baby super group team together. But we all had to go to Portland and actually play in Portland, and we were there for like the weekend or whatever, and we played a bunch of games to rack up the time needed to represent that team, and then we can go and play. And eventually that just got erased because more people fell off, teams kept getting smaller and smaller. We then started cutting back down to 5-man teams, things of that nature, especially once like the world stuff started happening and we noticed that everything was going to 5-man. Pretty much all our things started going to 5, so we could have more teams, right? That was the whole idea. And it just kept dwindling away to less and less players being interested without sites bringing in players. The sites weren't selling membership, the sites weren't promoting events, the sites weren't promoting leagues. So none of that stuff was happening. So it was just whoever was still around that was playing. There wasn't like a new generation that came in. The new generation sparked back in when Nexus kind of came into play, and when Sevron did this little Frankenstein pack system, that people started going like, okay, I'll try that. And then they started going to events to get the reminiscence of what it used to be like to play on the V4s and V5 timing system. So during those in that middle area, there was very little tournaments. There wasn't a lot of stuff going on. If there was tournaments, there wasn't a large turnout to the events, unfortunately. But it was always the same people, the same old faces. We still had the same top 15 guys there all the time, kind of thing. And then eventually we got our with Nexus and some of the like Madison, some of the sites in the Midwest, we had like this rejuvenation of young blood come in. That really enjoyed laser tag. That this is like the like Ace and Dot, and then Luke Skywalker, that generation of players coming in, that kind of took over and became like the regular people that were playing all the time in the tournaments, and they became like the next level of competition that we train and help improve, and they became our competition. So for us, there was a huge death in that mid area. And one thing I remember very clearly is the tournament that I went to when I turned 30. So I turned 30 and I went to nationals for the first time, and it was in Baltimore. No, not Baltimore. What was it? Oh my goodness, what's the name of the site? Near Baltimore. I forget the name of the site. It's the big one that we had Nats a bunch of times. And I ended up going there and ended up winning solos again for the first time. Like I hadn't played in years, and I came back and won solos. So like after winning, it was like 20 years later. It was like one of those like weird, I had done it when I was in my teens, and I did it again when I guess I wasn't 30, I was 28 because I did it when I was 18. So I think as 18 and 28, yeah, that makes sense. So I had like this big thing where like I had won, after all this time apart, I had won solos again. So I still felt like I still have it. And then obviously then you fast forward to 2014, at Worlds, and I'm still, putting up good numbers there too, and doing what I'm doing. So I felt that when we got that spark back with Nexus, we became active again. A lot of the old friends became active, and that's what happened here with us. We started meshing the players together, and then people just stopped playing. So it just whoever was still playing, come play with me, so we can get a team together. And then we started to really have these super teams, and we'd have 1 or 2 super teams, and that's kind of how it went for a long time. And I think even to this day now, it's kind of built that way. We try not to, because there's not that many teams going anymore. A lot of the teams still play within their own groups, which is really good. And I respect, like Baltimore has always played with Baltimore players for the majority of the time. Sterling has always played with Sterling players for the majority of the time. So that's the coast to coast guys, right? So those groups of players, just like we have our legends, and then we have a couple of the other West Coast players, have all kept our little groups together, and we just kind of fill in with whoever's still actively playing to fill in the gap. And sometimes we even pull from each other's teams, because if one team doesn't go, they still have their available players that we can pull from and take to our teams to go to events. So there was like, I wish, Infusion, like I said, just really hurt us really bad. And then just the lack of I want to say there was a big push of anti-membership here in the United States, where I feel
Yeah.
like in the Australia it might have been differently, where you guys push membership. Here it was not. It was like membership is like,
Yeah, well,
membership is bad.
we used to have operators. I'm a site operator, and we used to have operators conferences here in Australia, and it was told to us, in the US, membership's a dirty word over there. The US operators consider them to be smelly, and they shout a lot, and they turn off the regular customers. There was only but negative connotations of it.
Yeah.
Whereas in Australia, we didn't. We understood that narrative, but I don't think we were quite as corporatized, as particularly back in the early 2000s, late 90s. A lot of the operators were just, family businesses essentially, and yeah, it was a different philosophy, I guess, to having people hanging around the venue. So we'd do leagues on an off-peak night, and we're making revenue on a night that we never usually have revenue, and
Yeah.
also, you got your staff involved, so they learn more about the product, and there's a whole bunch of other advantages other than just trying to punch through big party numbers that we felt the leagues provided. But the operators in the US, were probably making so much money off their parties and their regular play that they didn't need the hassle, because that's the thing about competitions and tournaments, right? Is it's a massive headache, which is clearly the operators weren't up for that headache, which is why the players took up the mantle and decided to be the organisers of the tournaments. And I guess, did that have some issues in itself, having the top players organising the tournaments? Did that create complications, or was it a necessary complication because nobody else was willing to put their hand up to run the tournaments in a
No,
way?
I think the community that we had here, like the real, like the group of really passionate people that we have, the circle of players, like myself, John Mason, big pun, if people should know who he is by reference, but he had a big involvement in running a lot of the tournaments. And we've always been like very adamant about making everything as fair as possible, right? We want to run the best fair tournament as possible. Like we're never going to do anything to make things better for ourselves. It's always what's better for the tournament. So if there's an area that needs to be blocked off, or if there's an area that needs to be, adjusted, or walls that need to be covered, or mirrors that need to be covered, the discussions had, typically team captains are brought in. It's a whole, democracy of a discussion, and then the head operator then decides what's best for the group. It's never a situation where I felt like one of the people running the tournament made a decision that altered something that shouldn't have happened. Maybe that might have happened one time out of all the events I've ever been to, but it was something that might have not been drastic. We've had more issues with like terminations and people getting like double keyed out of the event by accident or things like that, where that caused way more issues than anything with like the tournament being run. The issues that we run into is the same issues that you run into every tournament, is the quality of the packs, right? Like whether the packs have been maintained well or not. Obviously how the batteries and having backup batteries for the packs, the staffing, you need to have people in there that know at least something of what they're doing. You can have the person in the front that knows nothing about laser tag, that's fine, but the people in the back, they need to understand kind of what's going on. And eventually because we were running our own tournaments, we would actually have to manage our own game masters, which I believe is something that you guys do now to yourselves. You have players as game masters, no longer actually have official game masters. Like for our first couple of nationals, we actually had referees with striped t-shirts and buttons running around, standing at the doors, giving teas to everybody. And little by little, it just became, hey, we need 3 guys to go in there and watch the doors, the bases, make sure nobody's getting the bases while they're down, or, that kind of stuff. And then, it became like that kind of environment. And with that, it becomes more of like, for me, if it's belligerent and intentional, they're getting the button no matter what. If it's an accident, or if they're doing it, not paying attention, I'll be like, hey, yo, get out, come back in. It's, it's one of those kind of things when you're game mastering and you're trying to be civil, and you know who the players are, you know their behaviors. If I see a person I've never seen before, I'm going to assume he's kind of new, and if he makes a mistake, I'm going to be a little bit more lenient on him than I would be on somebody that I know has been playing for years and intentionally throwing arm or intentionally doing something they shouldn't be doing to win. So there was that big change. We had players run tournaments with owners and with help with other people coming in and helping out. We've had people come in and game master and step in and help with the game mastering, which has been really great. But like I said, that whole infusion and system T thing really kind of eliminated our competitive edge. We
Yeah.
had all these new players come out that were very good at like this system. But
Yeah.
then, when you transform it into the tournament format with, one shot a second, this, that, and the other, it just translates really poorly, and everybody was not enjoying it. So a lot of people just stopped going to tournaments. And then again, until Nexus came out, and then we had the Nexus packs, which was like kind of a revisit, very close to, the V4, V5s, aside from the laser, right? The laser was a little bit quadruple the size of the V4, V5 lasers. But so the flip firing and the hand holding was all complete, new change. And from my understanding now, with the new system, the Helios 2 Pro, I want to say, has a new laser with no handguard on it, and I play with it a little bit, and it felt really nice in my hands. So I think like that's a really nice laser.
I'm not sure if you saw Andreas's post in the European Laser Tag Facebook group, but essentially he came and played the most recent US Nationals and gave it a huge rap. He said it's the best system he's played on for a long time, for a lot of systems. So it's got a barrel sensor in it, so you can't just leave your phaser hanging out around a wall. And of course, a sort of a return to the traditional style of phaser, you might call it. It's going to open up a whole bunch of new shots and ways of playing, which is exciting. So during this 2000 period, what was the culture like then? I know you mentioned earlier in the 90s, it was like, really
it was very
competitive.
Tough,
Did that change?
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, as time progressed and sites closed down and people couldn't fill rosters, and you keep going to these events and you keep seeing the same people over and over again, you start making friendships with them, and you start making bonds. So it became more of like a social gathering, if you will. You could always count on like the same 20, 25 people to show up every single time to come hang out, have a good time, and play. We would have routines. We would go and have dinners afterwards together, even with the other teams, or we'd get together and meet and go do outside activities as well, outside of zone. We became friends with a lot of people, especially me personally, because like I said, I became a free agent really early on in my laser tag career, if you will. So I got to go and play with Baltimore. I got to go and play with Sterling. I got to go and play with, and so when you play with a team and you're part of the team, you really get to know them. So for me, it was very easy for that to develop and for that to happen for me. But it was happening with a lot of other players too. A lot of players wanted to go to events, but their site was dead and there was only like 2 or 3 active players. So they would just find 2 or 3 other active players, or just join a team that needed 1 or 2 players or whatever. So that's kind of how the scene really played out during that particular area. It was a complete change. It went from like nobody knew anybody to talking a lot of crap on the forums to now everybody knows everybody. Everybody's kind of like cool with each other. You still have people that don't like each other, and you can see that they don't like each other, but outside of zone, they're like respectful and can tolerate each other, So I think that's part of growth too, because for the US scene, the majority of the players, I can say even to this day right now, the majority of players are older players, because we never got that. We got a small jump of youth to come in, and then we've never had that growth again. Like that growth is whatever that youth is still there. They're bringing in a couple of other youth players, but like, I had multiple conversations with a couple of people from the last nationals you just mentioned. I was like, so what's the new like up and coming talent look like? Like, is there any players that are like looking like any kid? I say kids. That's always the first thing I say, because they gotta be 18 to 22, like at this point, to like really come on and show their stuff. Otherwise, if they're older than that, I probably already know them and I know who they are. And I was told there was 2 or 3 kids that looked promising. So I was like, okay, great. Like that's happy for me to hear. And hopefully when, if the time comes where I can go to another event here in the US that's not on my daughter's birthday, I'll go check it out and be able to participate and see some old faces. Cause I saw like in the last tournament, there was people that I hadn't seen in many, many years that I used to play with that I would have loved to have seen and hung out with. So yeah, it's more of like a friendship and bond. But don't get me wrong, once we go into the arena and we put on the packs, it's like smack talk galore, and it's even more now because we know each other on more personal levels. So you get along, you get away with a lot more than what you used to back in the day, and it's more it's more chill now. When you had bad relationship with somebody and then you end up playing on the same team with them, or you end up spending enough time with them, or you're like, all right, we're having beers together now, it's cool. Like the atmosphere changed. So I feel like the environment for me and the environment in the US right now is that it's more of a small knit community of the same players wanting to keep it alive as much as possible. Always calling there, hey, do you want to play? Hey, do you want to play? Do you want to come back and play? Do you want to come back and play? I myself have reached out to older players than me saying, hey man, you want to come to a laser tag tournament? Just give it a go. Like, we just need one more guy, you know, and then they would be like, I haven't played in years. I'm like, I'll go, you know, and then that's kind of how a lot of that stuff happens. So
Yeah.
that's the environment I think that we're in now. We're in a much smaller environment, which really sucks.
Yep.
I don't think we have a very large, like, I look at I'm so jealous when I look at your guys' pools. Like, I wish we had something like that. But I also understand, like, there's big gaps in between skill levels. I mean, I learned that personally from going to Australia and seeing, you know, you have the top tier teams and lower tier teams. There's a big difference between them. I can say that in the US is like there's one low tier team and then all the other teams are kind of all the same because they all known each other for many years. It's just that one or two new teams that, you know, they're going to get crushed because it's their first time playing an event, or they're new players or whatever, and they just don't know the comp scoring in and out of the bases, how rotations, how strategy, that stuff's all new to them. So, you know, they're going to get crushed. But all the other teams are pretty much, you know, strong teams.
Yep.
Whereas I feel like, you know, there's more of a gap in
I guess that's the opportunity for the US, isn't it? I think I know the health of my local leagues, the health of like the national tournament has always been, you know, if we have a healthy mid-tier, we have a healthy tournament. And I guess it's maybe fair to say that in the US, you're missing your mid-tier at the moment. You've got a lot of experienced guys that have been around for a long time. Occasionally you have a few new faces that wander in, but the mid-tier really helps, you know, the sustainability of the competition, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. And like I said, you know, here in the US, because we don't have that membership, because nobody's doing those leagues, because nobody knows, like, you're not walking into a site and learning about other sites and the competition and the grand of it all, right? Where you might think, I really enjoy doing this, I might want to give it more of a competitive go. That's never presented to them. So, like, for example, when we have the site here at Battle Blast, and I go over there and I play with the guys, like, I hang out with the general manager and play games with him or whatever, and teach him, and then he teaches his people. And so a little of that got kind of passed down through that area. But those kids are still, I mean, you put them into a tournament scene now, they're still years and years behind because they just don't know better. You know, and especially when you go into the games here in the US, it's party games, it's party format. It's not one shot a second. You know, that's something that's only unique to tournament events when we run tournament events. Or if, you know, we're at the site, we're like, hey, can you please, next game, can you do one shot a second? It's all going to be members. And then, you know, they switch it to one shot a second for the members game, and then switch it back to party mode for the next game for the parties. So there was like a lot of that action going on.
Well, I've got some good news in a way. Part of what we want to do as the Laser Sports Academy, or we will be doing, is putting out instructionals on how to run leagues and tournaments and things, specifically for you know, corporate owned sites and you know, even like privately owned sites where the operator is kind of interested in tournament but has no tools to actually like know how to run them. So hopefully that kind of stuff will come in handy in places around, you know, in the US and other places around the globe, just to spark a few more scenes. I mean, that's our intent, is let's just try and provide some tools to spark some of these locations to get a little community going. So that it's so good to hear that there are some, you know, still some of the hardcores in the US, like keeping things alive, like simmering, because it's going to be so important for the US to come out of this quiet, that experience that's still around, to be able to nurse it or you know, steward it through.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, it's sad and funny at the same time, because, you know, US takes this big hiatus where there's really not a lot of tournaments happening. You know, the scene is really dying out because of the way the pack systems work and everything else, and because, you know, no owners want to do it, nobody's really pushing to do it. The interest is going down, so you have this this sad feeling of it fading away, right? But at the same time, during this time, when it starts back up again, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
So I come back and I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna have a hard time. You know, I'm 10 years older now. Like, I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of young talent in there these days. You know, and do I still have it? And then you come back and you realize, like, whoa, nobody has improved either. Like, there was this, you know, we were getting better, and then all of a sudden there's this thing where it's just like, it goes like this, and there's no improvement because nobody's competing. And then the competition starts back up again, but it starts literally where it left off. So for me, I was like, oh, I never actually lost. I never felt like I lost a step, even with not playing, because nobody else was playing and getting better. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Now it's a little different. There are a couple players now that in the last 10 years or whatever, I can honestly say they've been putting in the work nonstop, and they would be tough to deal with in the current state, right? Because I haven't played in a long time, and they've been practicing a lot. But during that middle area, nobody was improving. So when we all came back, it was like the same shopping order, if you want to say, right? We were still the best kind of guys here, and the second best kind of guys were these guys. And everything kind of still stayed in order when we all came back. So, and then, like I said, Nexus brought in some new generations of players, mainly through the Midwest. That kind of re-sparked the scene. They were young, they were hungry, they wore paint and shit, like they were crazy, and it kind of brought back a little bit of that environment and the competitiveness. And they were young guys, and they were all, they were good players. They were learning strategy as they were going, and this and the other. And we ended up hooking up with them, like me personally hooking up with them after an event, and then we kind of put our team together, a couple of our guys and their guys, and we kind of helped grow that youth. And then that's what, Ace, Dot, part of Legends, were both part of that group bringing up. Everybody else was from like the previous generation. Snoopy was like in between. So Snoopy's another good example of like that in between player that came up and really started climbing up the ranks really quickly during that time. So, now I'm hoping that with this new system, and hopefully if, obviously COVID and the economy and everything else is crazy these days, but hopefully one day things will turn back around and we'll see more sites, more membership, and hopefully something more in the US. So
Yeah.
for me, I mean, personally, I much rather travel internationally to compete in laser tag than I would to do it here. Mainly just because of the way, just the environment. I mean, I love the game as much as the next person. I love the competitiveness of it, but I also love just having fun and being there. So, I want to go to wherever the best event is being had.
So that's a good segue, mate. Is there a chance we'll see you out and about at any stage in the next year or two?
Yeah. So right now I'm currently working on the Sweden Nats has been kind of appealing to me. I've never been to the Sweden Nats before. I've seen a lot of video. I've seen a lot how to do some of the stuff. I know a lot of the players, and I've been invited to go with a U.S. team to next year in July, and I'm very much interested in going. So right now I'm looking to go and participate in that and see how that goes. I'll see how this year goes for me. But yeah, if I can make the next event for me, I think that will probably be my next event. Will be that.
That's wonderful.
And then I'll have Finland behind my back. I'll have Australia, and then obviously US. I got to play in Argentina, not competitively, but I got to go down there and play laser shots quite a bit. And when I went down there and visited, and I destroyed all their staff, whatever. It wasn't even, doesn't matter. They didn't know competitive scene down there. So, so now going to Sweden would be the only and last remaining major, laser tag area, I guess. I don't know. I guess France now has a scene, and maybe Germany has a scene now too, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Sweden, we have old rivalries with some of the Sweden players. So,
Yeah.
and I know that there's still old ones that still play. So
yeah, we went to Sweenats in 2019 as an Aussie team, and it was a great tournament. Yeah, high level of play. If you guys are heading over, I'm sure that will attract some of the top Finland players to head down as well. And just in terms of the scenes over there, I just had a conversation because I had a conversation with Moomin recently. I've just got the recent information from him, but France are active, but kind of doing their own thing. They're not as involved in the other European communities. Essentially, Finland, Sweden, and Germany are the three
gotcha.
Main spots at the moment. And yeah, I've yet to travel to Germany as well, but apparently they're doing quite well. I look forward to having a chat to somebody from the German community soon to find out exactly how they're going. But yeah, there's things happening there as well.
Yeah, I haven't had the pleasure of playing against any German or any of the French players yet. I think I've seen video, but I haven't actually come across any. Eventually, I'm sure. Maybe Sweet Nats, maybe.
Hopefully. Well,
Yeah.
mate, it's such a great experience to sit down, actually hear all these stories from you. I no doubt we could talk for a month about laser
Oh yeah,
tag, and
yeah.
all
No,
the stories from the
I
past.
had laid out all these international trophies right here. This is like
What's your
from
favorite?
it's really hard to judge all of them. So like the top ones for me, it's going to be obviously my very first solos in Vegas for me when I was 18. That one was really important to me. Um, Obviously the one in Australia, super important to me because of everything that happened there. The Finland one was super important too. This is
Yeah,
one of the other ones that when we went out and traveled, and we got to play in that event, that was a really tough event. Like we weren't too sure how that one was going to go. So
that was the
that
most impressive from an outsider looking in. That was the most impressive to go and beat the Finns in their own backyard in 2009.
yeah,
That was some good players at that tournament.
yeah. And
Yeah, really.
it was a good arena. I remember the arena. I enjoyed the layout of the arena. It was a really tough tournament. I remember it being a really hard event, and if I remember correctly, we kind of came back at the very end to win. I don't think we were ahead in going into the last game of finals, but I'm not 100% sure. I can't recall. But either way, yeah, and that was a big one because that was like a really important, like that was like going back to the very early ages of US laser tag, but in an international level. Like it was very like, we went in there with a pretty good mindset, and there was other teams in there with their mindsets, and it was very, very weird. Like, you've played against some of the Finnish and some of the Swedish
Yeah,
teams. They don't talk very much sometimes. They just kind of stare at you and you're like, they want to
yeah.
kill me. But
In those early days, I think it's much more social and interactive now.
yeah,
But in those early days, there was the language barrier. None of us knew each other yet. It was everybody wanted to prove themselves that they were the best laser sporting scene, and it was different back then.
yeah. So it's very. I think that competitive international scene is very similar to how it was in the U.S. early on, where it's that
Yeah,
competitive nature, um, and that's kind of where we're at. So I'm hoping that I miss it. Obviously I miss the competitiveness. I miss playing laser tag. I feel like I'm in good shape these days, even now that I'm in my 40s, that I can still go in there and just have fun with it and see what I can do. And if we can snatch up a trophy or two, I'll be
yeah,
more than happy to do that. Add it to the list.
absolutely. I need to ask you who's the hardest team or the best team you've ever played against.
Against. Oh, that's a hard one. Um, so as far as like certain teams in the U.S., obviously we've had a couple of different teams that have gone through that have been really good. Originally started with Bad Karma being my local Vegas home team. I claim, that team helped me out tremendously in a lot of things, a lot of aspects of learning the game. So that team was extremely, extremely strong and good. The Legends team that we put together was phenomenal as well. I
Which
think we
one?
have
Which Legends
three
team?
different we've
Yeah,
had like 3 or 4 different variations of the Legends team. But for me, it's always been the core group. So for me, the core group is always myself, Slick, and then Pun, who's kind of, me and him are always together. At one point, me and him became really, really good friends. My best man at the wedding and stuff. So me and him became really good friends. He was like the beast from the East, the best player on the East Coast. And at the time I was coming up as like one of the best players on the West Coast. And then he moved out to California and we just kind of bonded. So we became really good friends. Then we had like Cyber from Portland, who was a monster in his prime. He was really good. Homicide was part of Legends, who's really good. You met Cheese. Homicide, he goes by 2 names.
yeah.
Snoopy came up and became a monster himself. Can't take anything away from him as well. And then we had like other people like Trigger Happy, great asset to the team in different ways. Exit Sanity was on the squad. So we've had a lot of like variations of really good players coming through. But that team that we took to Finland was really solid. The team that we took to Australia was really solid too. I can't take anything away from those 2 teams because those were probably our better showing teams. Yeah.
Well, so for me, the best team I feel like I've ever played against was that 2011 GP team. Where does GP rate in the teams that you've played?
Yeah.
Has there been other teams that you'd put up in that class?
Yeah, I think GP. I'm not gonna take anything away from GP. I think GP is a great team. I think they have a lot of talent on the team, and I think they probably are one of the tougher teams that we've ever played against, for sure. I mean, I believe they beat us. So in the last tournament that we played against them, we didn't have our initial roster and we weren't really going in prepared. but it is what it is. We took the loss, and they got us on the last time we met up. So my hats off to them. They're definitely a really good team. The thing is that they also have variations of their team. So I would, I don't know what the best GP variation is. I want to say it's probably the team that represents them in Finland at their home site when they can have all their players present. Because I know that every single time they've traveled and we've faced each other internationally, I don't think they've ever had their full roster. And I don't think we've ever had our full like Legends roster. So I don't think we've ever had like our main rosters collide. It's always been like with one or two people missing from the rosters on both ways. So, but they're definitely one of the tougher teams. Competing in Australia, there was a lot of really good teams in Australia too. Doug's team was really surprising. I don't remember all the
That's amazing. Yeah, they won it that year. Yeah,
they won it that year. Yeah, and then
yeah.
I've always been impressed with. There's been several groups of teams that are just really well organized. Obviously, I've seen what you've put together with your squads and through the years and helped them improve. And I know that you've won several trophies yourself now over the years. And your teams were very good too. So it just comes down, you have different tournaments and the arenas factor tremendously. I feel like there are certain arenas and the packs that really influence certain things as well. Like that Bendigo site back in 07. Oh my God, I still have nightmares about that site with the tube at the top and the little L-shaped wall that's got to be on a slant for some strange reason. So you got to bend over even extra more. And like the second somebody yells something, everybody's running to all the freaking doors and everything and just shooting into the damn place. It was like adjusting to like big changes like that in arenas, like it's a lot for some people. And I think like those are big factors in tournaments is the ability to adjust the arena. Having home court advantage is a huge factor. I don't care how many games you've played in somebody else's site. If they've played more, they know more than you, period. It's just always how it's going to be. But yeah, I don't even know where to go with this right now. It's lost. But as far as GP is a great team. I think they have great talent. Like I said, there's actually supposedly some of the best players I've actually never even played against. So when I mentioned our rosters haven't matched up yet, like I said, their team captain GP is named after Gods and Pal. So whoever Gods is, I think is the guy's alias. I've never met that guy, and he was supposed to be like their best player for like the longest time. I think they obviously must have tons of good players because they're able to still win without having their full rosters, kind of like how we've been able to send different variations of Legends teams and still, place in events as well. So
yeah, it's I think they've kind of, it's almost like they've got a team philosophy or like a team credos or whatever you want to call it, and they've just cycled new players in that kind of fit their mold, I guess. So GP is almost like a brand in a way. Be interesting to see what happens when the core, like the Dark Omen of moves on from the team, whether they'll maintain the GP thing. But yeah, it's pretty special what they've done, and going over in 2011, winning over there, the Worlds was huge for them, and it was really sad they couldn't come to 2014 and compete against us. It was really like it was it wasn't the same without them, but we still had an amazing tournament anyway.
Yeah, I think it would have been really nice to have them there. I know that obviously we had the other Finnish team that represented that year, and I think they had actually won Finnish nationals that year, so they were considered, in my opinion, the top national team. If we go based off that, right? Yeah. But so I was hoping GP would show up too. We had communicated with them previously, telling them that we were going to try to get them to go. So I mean, obviously, whenever we go to events, we want them to be there, because for us, that is, in our opinion, probably our biggest threat or our biggest competition would be GP, 100%.
Yeah. Mate, we're going to wrap up soon. Final words for the kiddies. For anybody who's up and coming in the game, what are the top sort of 2 or 3 tips you've got for young laser sports players wanting to get good and become a potential GOAT one day?
All right, really simple stuff. All right, so I'll just throw. I'm gonna talk about myself real quick, real fast. So I'm pretty sure I want to say that still to this day, I hold the record for the most laser tag trophies. I have over 100 laser tag trophies in the U.S. and I have quite a few international trophies as well. So the advice that I can give you is really depending on what it is that you want to do. So if you want to be a great solo player, my best thing I tell you is learn to understand the arena and count packs. Understand your awareness. Understand where the groups are, where the points are, and how to get to them, and get to that action and get the points and get out. Keep moving. Don't stand still. Hit the packs and keep on going. That's how you win solos every single time. You're never going to win solos trying to one-on-one people in corners or anything like that. You want to be floating around, staying on your toes, finding the packs, trying to keep some sort of track of order of people coming up so that you can tag them right back down again and keep yourself going. If you want to become a better LOR player, just a better player in general, it's all feet work. Work on your feet work. All right. Do a little salsa dancing, a little 1-2 step. All right. All that stuff matters because if you're stationary, you're an easy target to hit. A movable target, and when I say stationary, I understand leaning, but you can still move your feet around and lean. You don't just lean. So feet work is really, really important for that aspect of things. And then enjoy the game, like love the game. It's really one of the most funnest, enjoyable things I've ever done. To this day, I still walk into arenas. When I walk out and the scoreboard comes up, I yell and I scream and I chant with the kids and I cheer on the kids and I cheer on the blue team or the red team or whatever team won, because that's all it is. If I'm in the arena playing with kids, I am loud. I am the big bad monster trying to get them, and they are laughing and giggling and running away and having a great time. And that's always what laser tag has meant to me, is just this really fun place to be in, and just to have fun with people. You know, it's just always been such a great experience for me. Yeah. And it's been lucky that I was good at it, and I was lucky that I got in with the right people, and I was lucky that, you know, I was able to travel and to play and to meet all these wonderful people from all around the world. I mean, to be able to say that at one point in my life, I could almost travel to any state that I wanted to, and I would have somebody that I would know there that would be able to house me for a day or two because I knew them through like laser tag, was like that's a big thing, you know? So for me, I'm very grateful to have this as part of my life. And, you know, in the future, it's still a dream to have a site. It's still my dream to one day open up a site and to be able to, you know, pass on my knowledge to staff and then to kids and to whoever else wants to learn it. But yeah, just keep having fun with it. Don't get frustrated. Don't let people get in your head. Get your timing down, get your angles, practice your flip fire, you know, play around with it, really get comfortable and dance and have fun. Like that's what the game is made for, is to have fun.
Absolutely, mate. Step one, learn to love the game. I love the game. Couldn't have said it myself.
I loved it the first time. I remember, like I said, I remember the very first time at Circus going into that arena, putting on the pack, it being smoky and dark, and me running around and shooting people in the back and running away, and it just was like the coolest thing as a kid. And then then you just learn more and more of it, and it's got more and more into it, and it just became this, and it became a huge part of my life. And I'm super grateful for it. I got to travel half the world because of laser tag. Yeah.
Nahul, Slick Warrior, you're a legend of the game, mate. So grateful that we've been able to learn from you today and get all the history from the US scene, and pick your brain for all the knowledge you have. Thanks so much for jumping on today, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. It was really good seeing you. And I'm sorry I took up so much of the time. If I took up too many, you can edit out whatever you want. If you need more,
we got a 2-part series right here. That's fine.
Anytime you want, you can go ahead and go.